Fantastic.
All right. So we are starting in 3, 2, 1. Hello and welcome. Welcome and hello. This is Wait, You Haven't Seen. It's a show where we talk about movies, and specifically, we talk about a movie at least one of us has never seen before. I'm your host, Travis, a.k.a. TV's Travis, and this is episode number 207. And our movie this week is 2001's Mulholland Drive, written and directed by David Lynch. And joining me to talk about it from Gleaming the Tube and a maker of documentary films, it's Kevin. Kevin, how you doing?
Hey there, Travis. Thanks for having me on. I'm really excited to dig into this classic of American cinema.
Absolutely. So, all right. So you brought this movie to my attention. I had not seen Mulholland Drive before, but I want to know your history with it. So when did you first see it, and sort of what's your background with this movie?
The first time I saw this movie was in the theater during its original theatrical run. I was in the very early days of dating the person who's now my wife, and this was one of our early dates. We went to the art house cinema to see this. We felt very sophisticated, and we both were really kind of deeply affected by it. I would say on the first viewing, I didn't feel like it made a lot of linear sense to me. It was after thinking about it that I was sort of like, oh, okay, that's kind of what's going on there. I was a fan of David Lynch's other stuff. I liked Twin Peaks. I really liked Blue Velvet. I thought Wild at Heart was fun. So going into this, it wasn't like a shock to the system of oh, there's going to be crazy stuff happening and
Right.
allusions to 1950s pop culture. I didn't watch it again until around 2013. I saw a theatrical production in London called Drowned Man, a Hollywood Fable, and I felt like it had a lot of Mulholland Drive energy. So I revisited it then to kind of see some of the parallels, and it was definitely a heavy influence on that show. It's one of those immersive theater, you wander around the set and interact with characters things. And then in 2000, during the height of everything being locked down, I was looking for stuff to do, and I was sick of just pointing my remote at the TV and being like, I don't know what to watch. So I embarked on a quest to watch a movie from every year since 1920 in order to sort of try and see how cinema evolved. And this and In the Mood for Love were kind of my 2001 picks. And so this, for this episode taping, this was my fourth time viewing the movie. I watched it this week on the gorgeous 4K new ultra high def Criterion Blu-ray. So that is my history with this film. I kind of counted among one of my favorite movies ever. I think when we were talking about doing the episode, I was like, well, these are some of my favorite movies if you want to discuss some of these. And this was the one you kind of sparked to. And I am curious, did you like this movie?
So I did. I will say that. Just like you, when it finished, I was like, the hell did I just watch? But I had the same reaction when I finished Blue Velvet for the first time about a year ago or so, maybe a little less than that, where I got done with the movie and I was just I was scratching my head because I have to there's a buffer of processing time when I get done watching something from somebody like a David Lynch, where I just need to process that. And then it's the further I get away from that first viewing of it, the better the movie is to me and the more I get out of it. And what it made me want to do was give it a week or two to breathe and then watch this again. And I've used this analogy a few times, and I love this analogy for a movie like this, which is, and mentioning that that kind of immersive theater experience works for this too. It's like going and seeing a play and then going back and seeing it a week or two later, but sitting in a different part of the theater and you're seeing the exact same thing, but now you've got both the experience of having seen it once before, and you're looking at it from a different angle now, and so you see different things and you experience it in a different way. And I feel like I'm going to get so much more out of another viewing of this as I kind of chew on it a lot more. David Lynch has been somebody who I slept on for a long time. I didn't, and it wasn't anything where like I felt like he was too pretentious or hoity-toity, because I'd seen some Twin Peaks and enjoyed that, and I think he's a fascinating person, but it was never a thing for me to like just dive into the movies. I have had this like yearning to kind of just dive into his movies over the last couple of years. It started when I finally sat down and watched Dune, and the 80s Dune is probably the least Lynch film of any of his films from what I can gather, but I still was just fascinated by what he did trying to adapt that and how difficult that book is to adapt. Yet he did a miraculous job given what kind of went on in the making of that. And so that got me to watch Blue Velvet, which was one that I hadn't seen, and it was partially because, and I told this story on the episode that I did, my mom saw that years and years ago and hated it with a fiery passion, to the point where she still holds a grudge to the guy that suggested they watch it to this day. And so it was sort of like, it sort of got put out of sight, out of mind for a long time because of the age I was when that happened. And then finally getting a chance to revisit it, it was sort of, it confirmed why she hated it so much. And I got that, which was a fun conversation with my mom when I talked to her about it. I'm like, yeah, I did Blue Velvet for the show, and I totally get why you hated that. But I loved it. I just fascinated by it. And it's something about this idea that like what you're watching, it's like unreliable narrator. What is real? What isn't? What is reality? What is sort of this dream state? Lynch just has this way of like putting things out there. I think his stuff makes you ask all sorts of questions, and then he refuses to answer any of them.
Yes.
And I love that. Like, there's something about that. I don't want every director to do that. I don't want every film to be that. Sometimes I want to just sit down and watch something mindless that's going to spoon feed me everything because I just need dumb popcorn entertainment. But this is like the difference between having a bowl of sugary cereal and having like a really good breakfast. And there's something to that I feel like for a long time I just sort of didn't ignore but didn't seek out. And now I'm like, I just want more of it. I just want to go start watching. I'm doing Eraserhead in a couple of weeks. I've never seen that. Fantastic. And I can't wait for that. But yeah, I had a banger of a time with this, especially the more I process it and the more like I take in sort of what happened. And there's so many layers and so much to this movie. I found a YouTube video, a video essay. This guy broke down not Blue Velvet, Mulholland Drive. It's about an hour long, but I am going to put the link to it in the show notes because I do think that if it's, and he puts right in the beginning of it, he's like, all right, spoiler alert, not just because we're going to be discussing the movie, but because we're going to be diving really, really deep into it, and you may not want that yet. So it's sort of the type of thing, listen to his spoiler alert if you do go to that link, but I think that if you like this movie, I think it's absolutely worth it, because it was a fascinating kind of breakdown of what went on in the movie, and it made me keep chewing on more and more. So
now you're familiar with like the history of the film, right?
Yes.
And its production.
So that was one of the things I knew of, and I was fascinated by this idea that this started off as a made-for-TV movie for a pilot, because he wanted to. Now, here's my thing. I don't know, because it's kind of varying reports. Did he want to make a series, or was it sort of he felt like he had to go that route again because the previous movie, because Lost Highway hadn't been like a huge hit? I'm a little kind of 50-50 on that.
I don't know if he's spoken to that. I think ABC was willing to take a chance because Twin Peaks, especially in its first season, was a phenomenon.
Mm-hmm.
And I think they were hoping to get some of that again, especially, this was around the start of the time when all of the attention was going to cable.
Yeah.
and The Sopranos and shows like that. And then I think they saw the pilot Lynch put together, which I think you can find pretty easily, and it's very similar to like the first 90 minutes of this movie, and we're kind of like pass. And then he got some more funding, like brought the cast back, reshot some stuff, added some new scenes, and created this movie. Like what I find miraculous about this movie is that it should not work. Like nothing about this movie should work,
No.
and yet everything does. I think.
It doesn't. And this is another analogy that I've used. I heard somewhere where getting a film made is like throwing a dart from orbit and hitting a bullseye. Like just getting the film made is a miracle in itself. But this idea that like you're right, on paper this shouldn't work. None of this should work for a film. When have you ever heard of a pilot not getting picked up and then becoming a major theatrical release at all? That just doesn't happen. Like you don't get money to do a lot of stuff. Like I can think of, it reminds me a little bit of like the original Star Trek series and how they made the pilot. CBS, I think it was CBS, was like, meh, I'm not so sure. And so in steps Lucy, like, no. This is good. Let's make another pilot. You'll watch it again. And they liked the second one. And 60 years later, we have how much Star Trek. And I saw in an interview Lynch was giving about this movie, saying basically by the end of it, like it wanted to be a 2.5 hour theatrical movie. I just didn't know that when I started. And like that's what this thing wanted to be. And like listening to him talk about writing and making movies is fascinating because he's just wired different than a lot of people. And the way he describes stuff is so... Go ahead.
I was gonna say, have you ever read the piece for Premiere Magazine that David Foster Wallace wrote, following Lynch around the set of Lost Highway, which is like one of my favorite bits of film writing
I have not.
It's pretty. That again, it's pretty easy to find online. I would like. It's not about this movie, but it goes deep into like what it's like to be on set with Lynch and like your sense of his process and how his main concern seems to be just getting what's in his head on the screen. What the reaction is kind of like a much lesser concern.
Yeah. One of the things I saw was Justin Theroux in this movie said in an interview that he didn't have the entire script. He would get pages day by day. And he asked David Lynch if the cowboy would appear again in the film. And according to him, Lynch's answer was, I don't know. We'll find out together. Like that, I feel like is such an encapsulation of what he does. Like it almost feels like he's just at the whim of whatever is coming into his brain. And he's just trying to put it out there for people to see. And like, I love seeing interviews with David Lynch and somebody will ask him a direct question and he'll just give him a little smirk, a little smile. Like, nah, I'm not answering that. Cause it's so great because he's a true kind of artist in that sense. And then he's going to put this art out there, this thing out there, and then let you interpret it. Whatever it's going to mean to you. Like he's got his ideas. There was another one where somebody asked him about 3D in films. And he's like, look, if an idea comes into my head that needs to be done in 3D, I'll do 3D. Like he doesn't care about the medium necessarily.
And, people say that the stuff he's putting on is inscrutable. To me, like, especially the Justin Theroux stuff in Mulholland Drive is clearly Lynch working some stuff out around his own feelings around filmmaking. Like, or people say Eraserhead is super weird, but it's also like this dude is anxious about having a baby and is scared of impending fatherhood, and that's like to me, like the themes of the movies are really kind of crystal clear. Obviously, they're not. What he's putting on screen is not super obvious in terms of A equals A, but I also feel like emotionally, it's absolutely hitting all those marks.
Oh, for sure. Because he's doing things in a way where He wants to evoke emotion in the person viewing it. And he's working his stuff out, but he's not just putting down the words, this is how I feel. He's giving it to you in a way that then you can absorb it, and you might not even realize exactly how you're taking that in, but it's going to be different for every person, just as it's different for him putting it out there, which is kind of, it's interesting. Like this breakdown that I watched about the movie was fascinating because it sort of took one level of looking at the movie, which is, the whole dream versus reality, and the Hollywood dream and all that. But then it went to another level underneath that of how, the dream sequences in the movie are less just this person's dreams of what they had, but more of sort of a universal dream of Hollywood. And it really, really dives into it a lot better than I can articulate, having only watched the film once, but just amazing, amazing stuff. And it's just, the more I watch and read and learn about David Lynch, the more I'm just like, I just want to absorb more of his content because it's fascinating. Even if some of it I don't get, or some of it is like there's parts of Blue Velvet that are just rough to watch. But at the same time, they're fascinating. And even bits and pieces of this were like, well, that's just weird. Like the whole scene in the diner with the guy talking about his dream. It seems so, like on the surface, it seems so out of place because it has nothing to do with anything else going on. But he manages to find a way to like work this scenario back in towards the end of the film. And you realize that, well, no, it doesn't have anything literally to do with events that are unfolding, but it absolutely has so much to do with everything that's been going on. And I found that really, really interesting as well.
And a lot of the scenes I think work moment to moment. Like I was always engaged in whatever was going on in a certain scene, whether it's kind of the botched hit, or Thoreau coming home and finding his wife in bed with Billy Ray Cyrus. And I mean, honestly, like I had gone probably about 12 years without having seen this film, and the stuff that stuck with me, the stuff that I always go back to is everything involving the Naomi Watts character, and Club Silencio, and the audition scene. Like that's the stuff I really remembered, and it was only after like reviewing lately, even viewing it last week, I sort of didn't have a general sense of the cowboy until this viewing.
Mm-hmm.
So,
yeah, fascinating thing too I learned was that the Monty Montgomery, who plays the cowboy, number one, I noticed right away he has no eyebrows, and that's like a great way to make somebody just look weird. Like take somebody's eyebrows off. There was a filter on TikTok that would remove your eyebrows from the video, and it just I see it and I'm just like, no, it's not right. And so like he looks weird, and then you learn that his costuming, he showed up with his own costuming, and those were actual clothes from a golden era Western movie star. Is it Joe Mix? I want to say the name was, but he was. I'm probably getting it wrong, but he was like the first Western star. And David Lynch was like,
it's
yeah,
Tom Mix.
Tom, yes. And it was David Lynch saying like, yeah, he showed up with his own wardrobe and it's worth a fortune, and he's just wearing it. And I thought that was really, really interesting. And that character is such a thing I expect in a David Lynch movie, like a character that just what what is this cowboy, like why is he there, why do they have to meet him where they do, and he just sort of shows up randomly, because after that he shows up again like 2 more times,
Which apparently is what happens if you do bad.
Yeah, and just out of nowhere, with no like build up, he's just like the cowboy's there, and then you see him one more time in a background of another shot, and that's it. And he's got that really just weird cryptic dialogue, that again you sort of think of, and it's like it shouldn't work, but it does. It's fascinating. You mentioned the audition scene, and that audition scene is like, it's what you expect if you know nothing about making movies and all you know about Hollywood is sort of what Hollywood has told you it's like. That's what you expect an audition to be like. And nowadays we sort of, because we're able to kind of pull the curtain back and see on places like YouTube sort of how auditions more often look. But that whole scene, Naomi Campbell in that scene, like that should have won her whatever award she won for this movie. I feel like that scene alone won them.
I feel like one of the great tragedies is I feel like Naomi Watts like emerges in this film
Naomi Watts.
as a like on can I swear?
PG-13. We'll go there.
On effing fire. Like she is so good in this movie in everything she does when she's playing kind of the naive hopeful Betty versus kind of the sort of haggard strung out Betty near the Diane near the end.
Mm-hmm.
And that audition scene was like I was just so blown away by her, and I feel like I wish her subsequent career had lived up to the promise of this movie. Like she's been in good movies. I think, The Ring's a good movie, and she but like she's never been in something that has blown me away like this. And I feel like the only other time where I saw an act like when I saw a performance in a movie where I was like, this person is amazing. I can't take my eyes off them. Was Kate Winslet in Heavenly Creatures. But I feel like Kate Winslet's career has kind of lived up to that. Not that she's made like nothing like only great movies, but I feel like she's become like one of the premier actresses of her generation. I feel like Naomi Watts showed us so much of what she could do in this movie, and I wish that she had lived up to the promise of it. But because holy cow, is she good in this?
She is amazing in this, and she had been around Hollywood and in Australia for a decade before this. She got started kind of late '80s, but it was this the whole thing of just kind of bouncing from one audition to another, smaller parts here and there. I remember her in Tank Girl as Jet Girl. But she never really like took off. This movie did, and I knew that Mulholland Drive was sort of her breakout role. I had heard that, but I didn't understand how good she was in this until watching it, because the way the movie's structured, when you start out, you meet her, and she is this very naive, just came from what is it, Blue Falls, Ontario, or wherever, somewhere tiny town, going to LA. And like the first third of the movie, she's very naive, and her dialogue and her acting feels stiff and like a little weird at first. And it's in that audition scene where you sort of see things start to change, and as it evolves and I realize what's going on and sort of what's unfolding in the movie, I get a better, like, I go back, I think back, and I appreciate those early scenes with her even more now, because it sort of makes a lot more sense what's happening in them. And her performance is just from start to finish, it's so good. And she did say that she was really glad the pilot didn't get picked up, because she didn't like the kind of one-dimensionalness of the performance prior to that last 45 minutes that they added on, the darker stuff. And I agree, because I think that just added so many layers to what she was doing. But man, she was good. And to her credit, The Ring 2, she did work with Peter Jackson on King Kong.
Which she was great
big.
in.
Yeah.
She was like my favorite thing about that movie. Acting against a green screen, I believed her the entire way through.
Mm-hmm.
That movie is not one I think is all that hot, but I think she is great in it.
I think she was great in that. I mean, and she has kept working. So whether it's Eastern Promise, she's worked with Cronenberg, she's worked with Lynch again on Inland Empire. I guess Susie Rabbit. So she just did a voice in that.
Yeah.
But I mean, to her credit, she keeps working. But you're right in that she never reached that kind of upper echelon, that stratosphere that you feel like she had a rocket strapped to her with this movie, and it should have just taken her to the moon. Because she's fantastic. I love seeing her and stuff, and there's like a realism. There's a realism and vulnerability to what she can bring to screen, and you saw all
Even
of that
in
in this
the
movie.
even in the big love scene with Laura Herring, where she's just kind of whispering to her, "I'm in love with you." Like that is so powerful.
Oh yeah, absolutely. Absolutely. And even more so, again, as the movie unfolds and you start to learn that Betty isn't who you think she is. Um, Now, how do you sort of interpret this movie? I'm curious what your thoughts are in terms of like the reality and dreams and Hollywood and all of that. Like, how does it break down for you? Because we
Okay,
don't have
I
a
mean,
restraint on spoilers. So
yeah, with the caveat that making sense is, to me, with this movie, somewhat beside the point. Like, what I like about this movie is how it makes me feel in the moment when I'm
mhm.
watching it,
Yes.
and what images stick with me. Like, so I don't have a general sense of like exactly what is going on in Club Silencio, for instance.
Oh, right, right,
But
right.
to me, it is very clearly that Diane Selvig has ordered a hit on her former girlfriend Camilla, to be killed, and is racked with guilt, and is also like dreaming or imagining like an alternate world where things worked out much better. There's this whole bit about Camilla beating her out for an audition at a dinner scene, and that is clearly played up in the dream sequence where the Camilla who's not Laura Herring, um, is sort of foisted upon the director by these kind of shady underworld figures.
Hmm.
Um, so like the blue box and the key to me are all tied into that, along with whatever kind of evil lurks behind the diner. Is sort of a manifestation of the evil she's perpetrated through having this murder ordered. And I mean, essentially, like in broad strokes, to me, that's what's going on. But
Yeah.
there's obviously like a lot more happening there. I think like I mean, Lynch has always been pretty open about one of his like major influences being the Wizard of Oz, and sort of how most of Wizard of Oz is ostensibly a dream with the people in Dorothy's life cast in different roles. I think this is doing a similar thing.
Yeah. Yeah, I get a lot of that from it, especially from this first viewing. Is sort of you're right, Denise or Diane. I don't know why in my head I keep wanting to call her Denise. Diane Selwyn was, young actor, prospective actress, comes to LA, tries to make it big, gets involved with Camilla, and that goes off the rails. And so she has this dream and constructs this fantasy world inside of her dream where she didn't get the parts, not because she wasn't willing to, sleep her way to the top or anything, but it was because like the conspiracy of Hollywood behind everything. And it's really interesting that way. Now there is another layer to this, that I found really fascinating, was the idea that Diane, we never meet the actual Diane, and what we get are different aspects of her personality playing out in this dream. So there is a part of Diane that is the naive young girl that came from the Midwest, but there's another part of her that is Camilla/Rita, and that is the part of her that sort of did go down that path of the casting couch and using that to further her career. And that like the cowboy embodies sort of the spirit of Hollywood itself, and that's why the cowboy is the one that ultimately tells Justin Theroux's director, like, you can have all these other parts of your movie, but this bit here is not under your control. Like, this fate is a thing that we do. And that like the whole movie is sort of a collective dream of Hollywood. And I thought that was really interesting. Again, the guy that did the video goes into way more detail and can explain it in a way that makes a lot more sense than I do. But what I like is that with this movie, both of those interpretations are correct. There's not a right interpretation to this movie. Like, I love the fact that you have people from her real life sort of bleeding into the dream in different ways, but yet there's the one character of the guy that runs the hotel, Cookie, who shows up again as the
Okay.
MC at
Oh yeah.
at the Silencio Club, and you had Coco.
Mhm.
And there's this really great feeling. So Wizard of Oz, I have heard, was a big influence, and I didn't know this until afterwards, but I got a lot of Sunset Boulevard feel from this movie. And then to find out
Absolutely.
that Sunset Boulevard was a big influence on this movie in particular, I was like, okay, I totally got that, because I just like that hotel apartment complex that she goes to felt like the house from there, and seeing like the Paramount Gate and all of that kind of stuff. Like there were so many moments in there, and you can tell Lynch loves that old golden era a lot too.
And I get a lot of Sunset Boulevard, and I've never really heard this mentioned by Lynch, but I also get a lot of Day of the Locust in this movie in
I,
terms of especially like you said, like the kind of the LA apartment complex
mhm.
and sort of the rot at the center of Hollywood.
Yeah.
Like, to me, like Day of the Locust is to me like all over this movie.
Yeah, yeah. I mean, it's really cool to see like those influences bleeding into it, and then but all filtered through Lynch's brain and the way that he sees things and kind of interprets them, and then spews that back out to us. Is really cool. Like the weird dude behind the Winkies, which I loved that too. Winkies Diner. I was like, oh, that was a Denny's at one point, and they just had to change the name of it. Um, which was great. But like that guy sitting out back of that diner who's got like mushrooms growing off of him, and he's just covered in dirt.
Yeah.
Like, what is he? We don't know. It's never explained. But he's there, uh, and he has the
It's
blue
not good.
box at one point, and whatever he's doing ain't good. That was, unfortunately, I will say this: I had that jump scare spoiled for me, because
Okay.
it's been shows up on those kind of top jump scare lists, and every once in a while I'll watch some of these lists of like, oh yeah, the one from Jaws and all this, and then that one's been mentioned so many times, because it's such a good one that you just don't see coming, that I kind of knew what was coming. It still startled me a little bit, because just the way he built it up and the reaction to it. What I didn't know, and because I never really see it like in place, was I love the way the audio is for that whole scene, because it's building, and building. You get the jump scare, and then all the audio is muted as he's reacting to it and falling down. And that, to me, was like an extra effect, kind of an extra punch from the jump scare, because now I'm disoriented, because you're not used to that. You're used to hearing like the scream or something, or the ah reaction that somebody gives in that moment. And so to take that away, I thought was kind of neat too. There's a lot of stuff like that in here. I love the idea of taking a thing and sort of not giving you the version of it that you're expecting. Like learning later on that the hitman that got hired was, in her dream version of him, he's like incompetent, because she feels guilty about hiring a hit person on her former lover. So in the dream version, he's kind of an idiot. And that whole scene played out. I loved that. I watched it twice. Like I got
That was like
partway
something
through
out
that
of a
one. I'm like,
Coen Brothers movie.
yeah, exactly. That feels very Coen Brothers. And it just kept going. Like at first, it started off feeling like something that Tarantino would write, with the dialogue and the way it's just two guys talking, like in L.A. And then it immediately, as soon as he pulls the pistol out, shoots the guy. I was like, oh, okay, all right. And then shooting the wall, and you hear the woman scream from the next room over. So he's like, oh, man, I'm not going to go deal with that. And like that whole thing, and then it goes sideways, and he's wrestling with her on the floor and tripping over the like surge protectors she's got stapled down and all of that. And then as he's dragging her through the hallway, you see the janitor down at the other end of the hall staring at him. And he's like, you can just see it on his face, like, I got to deal with this too. Like, it's just one thing after the other after the other. It was a brilliantly done scene.
Yeah, and like I think on a cursory watch, that scene could be like people could think like, well, that like what does that have to do with anything that's going on here? But like you said, I think I do think this all sort of hangs together way more than it should. One thing I find interesting about Mulholland Drive is it got a lot of critical acclaim at the time, and especially like I think it was a mini comeback for Lynch because I think Firewalk with Me didn't do well, and Lost Highway was kind of a disappointment. And this sort of, I think he got a Best Director Oscar nomination out of it, and people really like Naomi Watts. I think it did really well at Cannes. But it seems like in the last 20 years, at least on the critical end, this is emerging as like the movie of this century. I'd say, like, I think the Sight and Sound poll came out
Hmm.
a few months ago, and I think the only other movie from this century that ranked higher than Mulholland Drive was In the Mood for Love, which fair. Um, and I think the British film critics got together, and this was considered like the greatest movie of the century so far. And my brain doesn't immediately go to that, and I don't know if it's just a consensus pick because this movie, might be like genetically engineered to appeal to critics, but I also like don't know if I can think of too many movies that can topple it. I mean, like In the Mood for Love is probably one of them. Uh, Spirited Away, probably, but
Yeah, I was actually going to mention Spirited Away would be one that I would put there just because that movie. Oh man, that movie. Um, it, I'm going to need more time with this, I think, before I can put it on a list like that for me personally. But that's just because it's 22 years after it came out, and I'm just now seeing it. Um, but it is fat, and then to wrap your head around the fact that this movie was a pilot for a attempted pilot for a TV series that got rejected, in part because, as the story goes, the executive that was watching the tape was watching it at like 6 a.m. from across the room while he was like doing other things. So whether he was really paying attention to it or not, it's hard to say. But basically, a failed TV pilot became what is on a lot of people's list for greatest film of the 21st century. That doesn't like that shouldn't that sentence shouldn't work. And
no,
yet,
it's astounding to me. I do like I sent you my list of like these are some of my favorite movies. This is absolutely one of them. But
mhm.
and
And
I feel like I feel like there are like sometimes this isn't what I want. Like you said, sometimes this isn't what I want out of a movie. But when I do want this out of a movie, like this is probably one of the best uh, examples of being able to get that. Like sometimes I just want to watch Indiana Jones punch Nazis.
yeah, yep. Yeah, it's hard for me to say like I can't sit here and say this is going to go on one of my top 10 favorite movies of all time because favorite and best are such a different type of list. Um, but it's a movie that fascinates me that I want to watch more of. It's sort of like I hadn't seen The Apartment until just about a year and a half ago, and I'd heard about it, but it just was one of those that older cinema, 50s, 60s, and kind of earlier. Even Maltese Falcon was one that it
I think
just
everyone's got those.
yeah, it just wasn't in my wheelhouse, and so like because I didn't go fully down the sort of film school route that I had started on, I kind of just skipped those things and started working, doing other things. And I'm going back and watching these, and it's just they're fascinating to me. They're amazing, and it's like no, these movies are not only do they live up to the hype, but in a lot of ways they exceed the hype that I've already been given for them. And this is one of those types of movies where I've heard so many good things about Mulholland Drive, but because younger me was like, I don't know if I really like David Lynch. I'm not sure if I feel like that. And I sort of slept on it. And now I'm coming back to it. And part of it is probably I wouldn't have appreciated it as much in my 20s as I do now. But just like, holy cow, this is amazing. Part of me wants to live in the universe where this became a series, even if it only ran for a couple of seasons like a Twin Peaks, because I'm curious. I don't know how it would work. It wouldn't be what we have in this movie. Like, because Lynch has even said that he had no idea what he was going to do to finish this out, and he just sort of sat down one day and ideas started to come to him. But like,
I think it would be canceled in like after 3 episodes. It
but
would have been like on the air.
I wonder where he would have tried to go with it. Is the curious thing to me because you can't do what he did in this movie and make it a series. It doesn't work. Like this is a self-contained story. but where does that story go if it's trying to be stretched out and longer? And what is he trying to tell at that point? And it just fascinates me. Like, it's going to be one of those that's going to pick in my brain for a while. Like, man, this could have made an interesting thing, but at the same time, I don't want it. I want what I got. This story that we got, because you go an hour and a half through this story being told, and it starts off. There's the opening with the jitterbugging. My note was like, oh, I wasn't expecting swing dancing to open up the movie, but then as I thought about it more, it's like, but it is David Lynch, so I kind of get it. But there's that, and then there's like the shot that goes across the bed, and it ends on the pillow and just sort of goes into the pillow, and
Yes.
it's kind of giving, like, now I look at it and I realize, oh, okay, this is sort of telling us we're going to sleep and we're entering a dream. And then the more I think about those early stages of the movie, especially when Betty first shows up in L.A., it's shot, everything is bright and saturated colors and very soft focus, and feels very much dreamlike and sort of idealized L.A. And she's having this this very cheesy conversation with the old lady that I assumed were her grandparents, and then she's just like, well, anyway, bye, and leaves them, and they get in the other car and were like creeping me out with how big their grins were
Yes.
as they were riding in that car. I'm like, oh, something about this doesn't feel right.
Now we're in a David Lynch movie.
Exactly. It's like, oh, there's the Lynchian. But like, as I think about it now, it's such a dream sequence throughout the first, like, especially that first third of the movie. And then you see it start to break down, and you see the dream start to, like, all the luster start to come off of it, because there's these moments. Daytime is always so brightly lit in this movie. And I like that because it contrasts really well with all the nighttime scenes being very dark. But you're starting to see more nighttime scenes. You're starting to see just weird, like, cracks in the facade. And
Once they go into Diane's apartment,
yes,
once they like break into Diane's apartment.
which, by the way, when I talk about like rough stuff to watch, the constant showing of the body on the bed and lingering on that, I'm like, oh man, just I don't. Okay, I get it. She's dead. I don't need to. But yet at the same time, I can't look away from it because it's really effective. So it's weird how stuff like that can get that kind of reaction out of me, even though I know it's, just a dummy that's been laid out on the bed and made to look that way. It's still like they did a good job with it. Kudos to the production design. But yeah, that's where it turns. And like I say, that audition scene too is another one for me, where you start to see, because you see Betty, who to this point has been the like definition of Midwest girl goes to LA to want to be an actor. And she's there for a day and has already got an audition. And she's got, the aunts that left her stuff and all of this. But then when she's in that audition, which, again, it's sort of the Hollywoodized version of what an audition looks like. And you've got the director sitting there with a cast member that she's going to be acting with. And there's just a casting director who's not even involved in the project, just there, hanging out. And the cast member she's reading the scene with is a creepy old guy. And the thing starts, and you see her go from uncomfortable, but when she starts to act out the scene, the way that Betty changes in that scene, I was like, ooh, there's more going on here than I thought. Like, this is getting interesting.
Yes. And then like immediately after that, you have that scene where she and Justin Theroux's characters sort of like lock eyes for the first time. Like the camera movements on that seem different than what you'd seen before in the movie. Like
Yeah. Yep.
This is it's a very rich text, I guess.
It is. Even going back to the diner scene that ends with the jump scare, one of the things I noticed in that were camera movements. a simple. How many times have you seen a scene set in a diner in a movie, and it's just over the shoulder, and it's a shot of one person talking. You see the outline of the other actor, and then you flip it 180 degrees, and you just do back and forth coverage, and you do your shots. We've seen that so many times, and here, a very simple trick, or not even a trick, but just a very simple thing of taking that camera and just giving it movement. It's floating almost. So again, there's that dreamlike quality to things that are going on, but it's also unsettling. You're never comfortable because the image is always moving and back and forth. And Fischler, who plays that character, is a very unique looking person too. And so I really liked that because the little things like that just make that scene so much more interesting to watch, and you're caught in that moment with it in a way that is so different.
He had not been around that much when this movie came out. I think in the intervening 20 years, he's definitely become a hey, it's that guy character actor.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Which sort of takes away from it a little bit because you're like, oh, it's this guy. But I don't know. So were you surprised by how much you liked it watching it this time, or did you kind of know going in that this was something you'd think you would enjoy?
So given the way that Blue Velvet was for me, I had a feeling that I was going to appreciate the movie. I'm predisposed to like most movies. It takes a lot for me to not like something, even something that's not very good or that I don't love. I can usually find something, it was enjoyable. I didn't feel like it's very rare for me to feel like I wasted my time with a film at any stage. But I had a feeling like, okay, I'm probably going to appreciate this movie, but I don't know if I'll get it. And what I found was not only did I like it, I liked it a lot more than I thought I was going to like it. And again, the more time between when I watched it and when I think about it, the more I want to go back to it and watch it again and see what else I can kind of pull from it, which is always for me a good sign. So I would say that I liked it a lot more than I thought I would.
So I was a little worried, I was a little worried going into this episode, because obviously, like when you covered Blue Velvet on the podcast, things like I felt like you were mixed and your guest was very negative, and I was like I hope I don't have to go in and because it's hard for me to defend it on sort of like if someone's gonna say it doesn't make sense to me, I'm gonna be like,
well. And I think
because I think there are a lot of people for whom this movie does not work, which again, fair.
Yeah, no, and that is something that I think is a very good point to make, which this is not an accessible film. And I say that in a way, it's like you've got to really be of the mindset to sort of go with it, because certain movies, whether they're kind of popcorn movies or, I always like to use like martial arts movies as another example of you kind of know what you're getting into with a movie, especially an older movie starring Jackie Chan. Like you just know what you're getting. And so you get that mindset, you're fine. With Lynch, I feel like as I've watched more of his stuff, it's definitely that same thing, just in a very, very different way. You have to kind of be ready for what you're going to get, while at the same time never being prepared for what you're going to get, because there is no way to be prepared for what David Lynch is going to put in front of you. I've learned, but you can sort of be open to it. Now, I know many, many people that I could tell I would never suggest watching Mulholland Drive to, not because I don't think they'd get it, but because I don't think they would enjoy it. I don't think they would want to be in that mindset. That's not who they are, which is fine. Absolutely fine. But I think that if you are open to it, it's fascinating, and there's so much you can get out of it. And this is the type of movie that you watch and then you sit around at the diner at 2 a.m. talking about it and discussing what happened and what you took from it, and sort of how it can relate to other things that you have watched. And maybe it spawns a conversation that leads you to watching a movie from somebody you've never heard of before. I had a few weeks ago, I did a movie called Fish Story, which is a Japanese film. I don't know if you've ever seen that or not. I had never
Not
heard
so
of it before.
sorry.
And it's the only way I can describe this movie is it's a Japanese film where a punk rock song from 1975 eventually saves the world. And that doesn't make any sense. And the movie itself jumps around in time. But I watched it and I was just like blown away by how much I liked it at the end of it. And it's the same type of feeling I'm getting from like Lynch, in that it's a movie that's open to a lot of interpretation. And that movie had the language barrier of it being Japanese. So not only is it structured very differently from a Hollywood film, but I'm also watching it in a language that I don't speak. And yet I took so much from it there. And that's kind of what I've been getting from watching David Lynch is it's not structured like a movie that I would, it's not a direct, A to B to C movie. And in some ways he is kind of speaking in a language that I only know a little bit of. But it's fascinating to me, and it's weird too, which I kind of like. There's something I like about the weirdness of what he does. Like the Silencio, the whole Club Silencio stuff just comes out of nowhere, and it's so bizarre. And it reminded me of the
It's
scene.
bizarre, but also super, like, I thought, deeply moving.
Oh, very, very much so. Very much. It reminded me of the scene in Blue Velvet where they go to what's his name's apartment, and
Stockwell.
Dean Stockwell's place, and he does his little presentation for them as he sings the song. It's very
Well,
similar
I mean,
in feel to that.
it's two Roy Orbison songs too, which I
That
guess
helps.
helps. Um,
Very
but no,
different,
I
though.
think
But yeah, like it was that same type of thing, and it's just there was something about that I was just drawn. It's the bizarre that draws you in, and just makes you like pay attention to what's going on, and it's sort of I come away from them like I don't know what I just watched, but I liked it.
yeah, and I feel like it's one of those things where I don't necessarily want to take the watch apart too much with it because I like the way it plays on the unconscious as well.
Mm-hmm.
I think I have very interesting dreams after I watch a David Lynch movie. So I'm worried if I pick it apart too much, it'll like the magic, like I'll break the spell.
In some ways, yeah. Like for instance, why was he carrying a golf club just randomly? He just happened to have a golf club he could beat that car with. Now, there's supposedly a scene longer where he talks about he was on the golf course, but I didn't know that until like a few minutes before we started recording this show. So my thought, as I'm watching the movie, I'm like, all right, dude just walks around with a golf club. Sure, why not? It's L.A. People do weird stuff. The cowboy, just being a cowboy. Who, by the way, Monty Montgomery, the way they lit everything, and he looked to me like several photocopied versions of William Sadler. Is what he reminded me of. He had that kind of structure to him, that sort of look, like if you rounded off all the edges of William Sadler, you'd get him in that role, which I thought was kind of fun. There was a few different people in this that I'd see that I'm like, it reminds me of, but not quite. And then seeing then this is random stuff like Billy Ray Cyrus that cracked me up when he walks into the room and there's just Billy Ray Cyrus laying in the bed with his wife. And that whole scene too, the way it played out was so surreal because here's the director comes home. Adam walks into his house. He's calling for his wife. She doesn't answer. Walks into the bedroom. She's in bed with Billy Ray Cyrus and starts screaming at him. And he just turns around and leaves. But he takes her box of jewelry. And then the whole thing where he's pouring the paint on that. Meanwhile, the background music is just like this like upbeat, peppy jazz number going on.
Yeah,
that just feels so weird and out of place. And I loved all of that. And then
I know we lost Angelo Badalamenti recently, but I think this is probably even more so than the Twin Peaks score. Like this is probably my favorite score of his. And he appears briefly in the movie too. He's
Yeah.
one of the shady underworld figures, saying like this is who's obsessed with espresso.
Yes, him, and he was paired with one of my favorite character actors, Dan Hedaya, who I
Yes.
love. I love seeing. He will forever be the captain from Running Scared for me. No matter what I see him in. I know a lot of people will equate him with Nick Tortelli, but for me, Running Scared made the impression on me as a kid. But like that whole scene was bizarre when they're after Adam leaves the house and their gorilla of a goon goes in. That scene cracked me up because he walks into the house and the wife just jumps on him and starts trying to beat him up, and I'm like, you're not doing anything to that guy. He's Man Mountain. And he's just like one punch and finishes it off and just leaves. Like it was another one of those where it's like, I don't know what just happened, but that entertained me.
And I feel like those discrete scenes, which you could lift out of the movie, I think add up to a whole. I think because especially because they're kind of funny, it keeps the movie from being just kind of especially at the end, like where Naomi Watts shoots herself. Spoilers. From being just something you leave being like that was nothing but emotionally draining. Because I've been to movies that are nothing but emotionally draining. Because I feel like this one is so kind of like bursting with ideas. You leave it, and like you said, you want to talk about it after. I hadn't thought about this until just now, but because this was one of my like first dates with my now wife, I'm like, this is like a great first date. This is like a great early date movie because you can talk a lot about it. Like in the late '90s, I went on a date with someone to leaving Las Vegas, and neither of us wanted to look at each other after.
Yeah, it's for me the movie that immediately pops to mind when I think of like great movie that I don't necessarily ever want to watch again is Monster. Like
Hmm.
that movie's fantastic and the performances in it are unreal. But I don't need to watch it again. Like I'm fine. And this movie does have those moments of levity and like just something different going on. It's also a very different movie, but it doesn't fall down the hole of being completely dour and nihilistic, which I think it could easily have done.
Yeah, I don't necessarily think of like I think rewatchability has its place, and but I don't think that's the only metric you can give against a movie. Like I really liked
Oh,
Richard Linklater's Boyhood, but that movie's like 4.5 hours long.
right.
And like I found that movie like deeply affecting, but I don't know if I would watch it again.
But I think for me it depends on like the reason that I wouldn't watch it again. Like something like that, okay, it's 4.5 hours long and is it effective? Yes, but like I don't need to watch it. Like Monster is one, it gave me a lot. It gave me a very visceral emotional reaction to the film that I don't necessarily want to experience again. Another one that did this for me was I watched this with a friend of mine, and it was really funny because he just picked it, and a couple of us sat down and watched Man Bites Dog. And I don't know if you've ever
Oh
seen
yeah,
that, but that got
I
done,
have
and
seen Man Bites Dog.
the three of us got done watching, and it was like, all right, who wants to go take a shower first? Um,
Yeah,
like, I'm just gonna go home and take like four, and then the movie was fascinating. Let's never talk about it again, kind of thing. Like it was just, it's that feel, that grimy feel that you get from some movies where they're really, really good, and I am in at least a small way who I am today because of experiencing that. But I don't necessarily want to go through it again. Um, and something
I
like
know
this
for me
is,
too. Getting older has made when I was say in my like late teens, early 20s, I was up for anything. I feel like in terms of watching movies, and I
mhm.
am much less up for things now. Like I was sort of, I can watch the most extreme stuff imaginable. It doesn't matter. And now I don't have a lot of time for it.
No, and I think
I don't know if it's just I've changed as a person or what.
yeah, and I do think that matters. Like the way we are, who we are when we watch a movie is different every single time. And you know, I'm pretty certain that had I watched this when I was 19, 20, 21 years old, I wouldn't have liked it. I wouldn't have gotten it. I had a similar experience the first time. I watched Ryan Johnson's Brick. I got
Mhm.
done watching it and I was like, okay, I don't. What was so cool about that? Why did people say that was so great? But I gave it a second try because I watched a couple other Ryan Johnson things and I really enjoyed them. And I went back and watched Brick again. I'm like, okay, no, I get it now. I'm in a place now in my life after a few years where I can appreciate what that was. And I think that goes a long way to your like or dislike of a movie when you watch it is who you are at the time you're watching that movie, which is why some movies can stand the test of time for people and some don't. Um, because either it's going to take you, it's going to transport you back to who you were when you saw that, or it can't pull that off anymore, and who you are now is so vastly different from who you were then that it doesn't hit the same. So I think that that's a big, like I have this conversation a lot because a lot of I'll have people tell me, this like not right now the hot button one is MCU movies, and they'll talk about how
Mhm.
it's just these new ones are terrible, they're awful movies, and I'm like, well, what's your metric for awful movie? Because is it watchable? They're all eminently watchable. Like I have seen things that are unwatchable that somehow got you know distributed. But what was your expectation going into it, and who are you now as opposed to who you were when that movie came out? Or comparing, something like my favorite one was Thor Ragnarok versus Thor Love and Thunder. Both of them are Taika Waititi, who I love. Um, they're very similar movies, but when Ragnarok came out, it was new, it was fresh, it was so different. We hadn't seen that yet, and it was kind of a nice new chapter to this type of movie. And then we're retreading a lot of the same things a few years later. It's no longer fresh. It's not going to hit the same way. So now all of a sudden it's terrible. And I think that goes a long way too. So,
I agree, and I do think with Marvel, I don't blame anyone with sort of getting fatigued by the Marvel movies because
oh
there have
no,
been
not at
so
all.
many of them, and they suck up a lot of air. What's been interesting for me is um, just when I was getting sort of out, like my daughter who's 8 is like very excited about the new Marvel movie. So I went with her yesterday to see Quantum Mania.
Mm-hmm.
She loved it, and I'd rather go see that than something unwatchable. So it was fun going with her to the movies in a movie that we both kind of enjoyed. And, kind of like the 12-year-old comic book nerd that I was, would be astounded that there's a third Ant-Man movie
Right.
anyway.
Yeah. And I'm with you. Like if you're fatigued with Marvel, for instance, it's just and that's the you know um, current kind of hot button. But like if you're fatigued by that,
Mhm.
I get it. This movie is what the 31st movie that they've put out since 2008, something like that.
Yes, something like that.
I mean, and that's not counting anything that's been on
The
Disney
TV
Plus
shows.
series wise, or any of the 5 series that were on Netflix that are now on Disney Plus. Like that's a lot of content in that period of time to be putting out.
Well, it's
So
weird because I think part of the problem now too is the barrier to entry. Because even when my daughter was asking about Quantumania, I said, "Well, we should probably watch the first two Ant-Man movies." But then I guess you got to see Civil War to understand why in the second one he's like that. And then do you need to watch Endgame? But if you watch Endgame, you got to watch this. And eventually I was just like, I'm sure she'll figure it out. Like, so we just went to the movie.
yeah, it's really honestly become Marvel Comics in a lot of ways.
Yes.
Like just jumping into a random Marvel Comics series, you're going to be completely lost at this point. And it's really
Well,
hard
what's
to do.
it's become Marvel Comics from the 70s now too, which
Yeah.
I feel like the up until Endgame, it felt like it was more like 60s Marvel because it was relatively self-contained. It was kind of telling one story, but the movies sort of worked on their own. And I feel like now with the Disney Plus shows and the movies they're making, it's sort of like it's sort of like characters who are a little weirder. So you've got like Werewolf by Night TV show, and you've got the Shang-Chi movie, and you've got so the Eternals, who are like a total, like all these characters that emerged in the '70s in Marvel,
Yep.
who were a little funkier. Um, and so I'm I do think the audience isn't sparking to all of that as much. Much like how Marvel was, if it wasn't for Star Wars comics, Marvel would have gone like out of business in the '70s.
Yeah, yeah, and I
And
mean, there's
then I think in the '80s they sort of like consolidated and the X-Men blew up, and I'm wondering if now that Marvel's going to bring the X-Men in, maybe that'll history will repeat itself there too, where the X-Men will rejuvenate the MCU.
it could, and I'm all for that. I'm really curious to see what they do with X-Men in general, just because there's so many good characters in there. How do you pare that down? Because that's a thing that always fascinated me with the Bryan Singer X-Men movies, was like, how do you choose which characters to go with?
Mm-hmm.
Because there's the part of me that's like, start with the originals, but that would be kind of boring because there's been so many characters that are iconic that came after that. So it's great. We live
And
in
like
an era.
the originals were not what was popular.
No, they really weren't.
Like
No, it got
so,
popular because of Wolverine and Storm and those characters.
yes.
Um, so yeah,
It also got popular because it was a soap opera, and I'm like, maybe the X-Men should be a TV show.
I'd be down for that. They've got the
Yeah.
budget to be able to
So
do that kind of stuff now, and plus, I'd like to see them maybe slow down a little on like feature films so that these VFX houses can actually keep up with the content.
yeah.
Because I feel bad for those guys too. Those guys and gals are doing all that work.
So I'm still generally fine with what Marvel's up to though. But I get it. Like, but and I also think there's a. It seems like just from looking online, it seems like there's this element of culture war to Marvel and DC where like you have to pick a side, which I find really bizarre because in the comics it was always like, you're following creators who are going back and forth between the companies.
Mm-hmm.
So like it's I don't understand this whole like it's like a sports team jersey of like, well, if Marvel's doing well, that means DC's not doing well. Like
Yeah, I
I
don't
feel like it's an all ships rise situation.
exactly. I've never gotten into those things, whether it's Marvel versus DC or the Beatles and the Rolling Stones. I'm like, nah, I like both. I can listen to the Stones and then turn around and listen to the Beatles. I don't have to choose one or the other. And it's how I feel about a lot of things because end of the day, like what you like, and if all of it is like, just because one thing is good doesn't make another thing bad. I've never understood that idea. It's the same thing with, kind of coming back to what we were talking about earlier, with like popcorn movies or something directed by David Lynch. A David Lynch movie is not going to make $1 billion at the box office because there's just people are going to be like, I don't understand what's going on. I can't watch that. I don't like it. And that's fine. It doesn't have to be for everybody. That's the beauty of art. Art isn't supposed to be for everyone all of the time. So,
What I find sad is I do feel like I'm worried about movie theaters. I feel like because like when I went to Quantumania, there were like 12 people in the theater, and that's that's this big Marvel movie. I mean the what I do sort of get heartened when Everything Everywhere All at Once came out. My wife and I tried to go see that, and we could not get a ticket. And this was in like its second or third week of release.
mm,
It was like, oh, we'll go to the movies because no one's ever at the movie theater. And we
right.
went to the theater in Somerville. It was sold out, and it was like, okay, well, let's look at this other theater, and that was sold out. And then we looked at like our fifth theater 2 hours later was what we wound up having to do to see that movie. So I guess if the right content comes along and people are still going to be up for it, but I am worried that the studios are so risk averse these days
They are,
that
and it does worry me.
the sort of thing that's going to strike a chord, which is usually the thing that comes out of nowhere, like isn't going to happen. Like there's no appetite for the risk there, and also there's so few kind of mid-level movies.
That's the other part of it, is that's what I loved about Everything Everywhere All at Once, was it was such a breath of fresh air in terms of like the type of movie.
Hmm.
That's what I liked about when I saw Knives Out. Knives Out was that thing in 2019 where it wasn't like, it has an amazing cast, but it wasn't this big blockbuster thing. It just sort of
Yeah,
showed
it's not
up.
a big blockbuster, but it's also not like this sort of inscrutable indie film either. Like
Right.
it didn't feel like it was shot on someone's phone.
And even to a point, and I mentioned this last week watching, I was watching No Escape from 94.
Hmm.
And like that type of movie doesn't happen anymore. That sort of mid-level action movie doesn't, because that type of thing would be a direct to, Netflix type of
Yes.
movie. But even theirs tend to like, I miss that. I miss those types of cheesy, mid-level action movies where they look good, but they maybe have a little less on the star power, and they're sometimes a more high concept thing or like a weird sci-fi actioner. I miss that kind of stuff in theaters. But
Yeah,
I
especially
also,
like every so often something like that'll break out and be way better, like punch way above its weight class,
mhm,
and will make someone a star or will make a director. I feel like
yeah,
Pitch Black was like that. It was this
yes,
dumb sci-fi monster movie, but it just everyone was doing their job, and that movie worked really well, and suddenly like Vin Diesel was a star.
yeah, yep, and that's the kind of thing that I want to continue to happen because I grew up, and I also know that I'm kind of a dying breed in that I'm like you. I love going to the theater, and that's what I grew up with. That was just a thing. You went and saw movies in the theater, and then later on you could watch them at home. And I love the ability to watch stuff at home. And we are in a just we are lousy with choices of what to watch and
Yes.
where to watch it, and that's great. I just it bums me out the idea of because like one of the interviews I was watching with David Lynch, he was talking about when you can make the picture huge and you can make the sound immersive and you can get everybody to sit down and be quiet and pay attention to it, you get transported into this like dream world. You can go into the dream of the film. And I feel like I know a lot of people that hate going to movie theaters now and are very vocal about their hatred of going to movie theaters. And that's fine if you don't like that experience, but there is an experience to going to a movie theater that is unlike watching it at home. Now, I have been lucky in my life in that I have not had a lot of really bad movie theater experiences. I hear some horror stories from people where they go to the theater and the guy sitting next to him is taking his shoes off and like putting his feet up on the chair in front of him. And that's that I don't understand at all. But like,
Or people like talking through the whole movie.
yeah, that kind of stuff.
My
So,
my my absolute favorite was I went to see American Psycho with some friends, and the people in front of us brought like their 6-year-old kid to see American Psycho, and this kid was screaming his head off through the whole movie.
yeah, I would have been too if I was 6 years old seeing that movie.
Well, exactly. I'm just like, but I was like 20 at the time. I'm not gonna like can't be like, hey, maybe you shouldn't bring your kid to this movie. But
That's
it
what, by the way,
was
that's another movie that I initially didn't get. And then I thought about it more and I'm like, nah, it's actually okay. No, I understand what they were going for now.
Mhm.
Um, so that's another one that kind of fits that mold we were talking about earlier. But
yeah, it's and yeah, the talking talking people on their fucking phones. I'm sorry.
yeah,
I
no,
swore. Um,
it's okay.
uh, like that's part of the theater experience can be rough.
Hmm.
And I think obviously with COVID, people have different comfort levels for going back to
Also true.
and what that's going to look like. Yeah, during like peak 2020, some of the theaters around here were doing like private rentals, and I was like my friend Ryan rented a theater that and they had like a selection of like 35 millimeter prints too. So
Oh wow.
he rented it and showed John Woo's The Killer on 35 millimeter, which was
Oh,
awesome.
that would be so cool. Yeah, I've
It
thought
was
about that.
great.
Um, I think if I was in a place of better population density where I could get, a good number of people to kind of be involved in something like that, private theater rental I think would be really cool to do. Like, once a quarter, do it a couple times a year of get
Yeah.
people together and let's do a movie. Because one of the things that's really cool is I'm lucky enough because I don't live in a very populated area, so we only have the one multiplex.
Mhm.
But we also have a little art house theater that will show the movies that don't show up at your AMC's, and then they'll do little things like they used to run. I think they've started it back up, but they would do their Friday night movies where it was like $3 a ticket, and they would show The Running Man or John Carpenter's The
Okay.
Thing or something like that at like 11 o'clock at night. And they would do occasional movie marathons. They did a Coen Brothers marathon one day where it was like $20 and you got 4 movies. And it was a Sunday. I'm like, I got nothing else to do. I'm going to sit in the theater for 8 hours and just enjoy, that kind of stuff. That's the type of, and the audiences that are going to go for that, I think, are also more into watching the movie. So
I think so. Yeah. I'm pretty lucky. I mean, I'm outside Boston. There's a lot of great movie theaters. I think like there've been some cool double features. Like they did a double feature of The Thing and Blade Runner, which was awesome.
that'd be cool.
They did a double feature of They Live in Chopping Mall, which I loved.
That's
Um,
not a double feature I would have put together, but I like that.
it was sort of this anti-consumerist theme. I think it was for the day after Thanksgiving.
Perfect.
Like the Somerville Theater near me will like they'll do 70 millimeter stuff. I saw Lawrence of Arabia for the first time there in 70 millimeter, and it
There
blew my
is
goddamn mind.
there is nothing like seeing that movie in 70 millimeter. I've been
Yeah.
lucky in that kind of, and it's what happened was it was an old theater in our town. It got turned into like a double screen back in the 80s, and they gutted the whole thing out and redid it, and it's this old movie Palace. And they showed, I remember seeing Lawrence of Arabia in 70 millimeter there, and 2001: A Space Odyssey.
Yeah,
And
they were. I saw that in 70 millimeter there too. It's just because I think there are prints like going around. Like,
mhm. Well, this was during a film festival, and so they did all of Kubrick's films for the week. So
oh, nice.
I got to see on the big screen basically every movie he made. I think everything. I think I saw everything but Eyes Wide Shut. I don't think I made it to that one, but like I watched the rest of them because I was involved volunteering for the festival, so I would go on my off time and go catch everything.
Even like the early stuff.
Yeah, they had. So I guess the other one I didn't see Lolita,
Okay.
but I saw 2001. I saw Barry Lyndon. I saw Paths of Glory, and it was great.
Is there
They were
Strange
all.
Love?
Definitely saw Strangelove. Absolutely,
Yeah.
I love that movie. So that was a great experience to get to see all those on a big screen, and just perfect prints and amazing sound and all this great stuff. So I've been lucky there, but like I don't want theaters. I don't necessarily want theaters to go away, but I feel like there's going to have to be some kind of a change in how they operate. I think the days of 15 screen multiplex are numbered, and we're going to see more of these smaller theaters working. But as long as they stick around, I'll be okay with it. Because there just is nothing like getting to sit down with your bucket of popcorn and watch your movie on a big screen like that. I can't replicate that at home. I just can't. Especially when it doesn't have to be a packed theater, but other people in the theater. I think makes a difference
Yeah,
too.
exactly. Like having that communal experience, I think,
Mm-hmm.
is
Absolutely.
is important because there were a few times I think like last year where I'd go to a movie, there'd be maybe one other person.
Mm-hmm.
So
Yeah, it's weird when you're sitting in a giant room like that with like 2 other people. But
yeah,
well,
I don't know. Have we exhausted Mulholland Drive?
I think so. There's not a whole lot more to squeeze out of this. I will say though, if you haven't watched it yet, and I recommend the movie personally. I had a great time with it. Your mileage may vary, so if you hate the movie, I'm sorry, but I do think it's worth a watch. I really, really do. And thank you
If for
so
nothing
much.
else, that Naomi Watts performance.
Oh, her performance is unreal. How good it is. We didn't talk about her enough and how good her performance is in this movie. Like I can't. There aren't enough good things to say. It's just
Like I can understand someone not liking the movie. I could not understand someone watching Mulholland Drive and being like, she was terrible.
oh no, absolutely. I mean, she is just honestly, one of the best performances I've seen. has got to be
I'd
up
put
there
it
in
up
that order.
there. I'd put it up there too. Yeah,
Yeah,
it's
like
absolutely
it's on the
worth
short list
passing
for
on.
me of like just amazing performances and emotional performances too. You feel for her throughout the movie, just more and more, and all sorts of emotions. It's great. It's a good movie. Thank you so much for getting me to watch it finally. Um,
Oh, thanks for having me. This was really fun.
well, yeah, welcome back anytime. We'll find a movie you haven't seen next, and I'll
All
expose you to
right.
something. It probably won't be quite to the level of David Lynch, but we'll find something fun for you for sure. Um,
Sounds great.
Now, I mentioned at the top of the show your podcast, Gleaming the Tube. So let people know what that is, where they can find it, and other stuff that you're working on, other stuff that you do.
Sure. Gleaming the Tube is a podcast where my co-host Michael and I watch and discuss a film that involves skateboarding in some capacity, no matter how tiny. We're trying to fully document the entire history of skateboarding on film, and we put out an episode yesterday about the movie Saved from 2004, and I think we're doing one next week about Skater Dater, which is the first skateboarding movie ever from the 1960s.
Oh wow,
So, gleamingthetube.net is where you can find that. And yeah, go check it out. And Travis and I know each other from the DragonCon digital media Discord server. I'm going to be DragonCon this year as an attending professional. So if you're going to DragonCon, go to panels that I'm on. I'm going to be talking about nerdy stuff, hopefully movies, my day job as a video producer slash creative director. So it should be a fun time. Go, go, go.
excellent. Well, hopefully, I'm working on trying to get myself down there to Dragon Con, and if I do, I'll definitely hit the panels that you're on and get to hang out a little bit. But gleamingthetube.net, and then if you get to Dragon Con, look for Kevin and some panels there. Excellent. Thank you so much for being here this week. This has been a ton of fun.
My pleasure.
I record this show Sunday nights, usually around 8 p.m. Eastern time. Twitch.tv/TV's Travis if you want to hang out live while it goes on. Show comes out on Wednesdays wherever you get your podcasts. You can go to tvstravis.com, find this and other shows that I do. And there is a Patreon for this show. It's patreon.com/WYHS. Just got a new patron today, actually. So thank you, Leaping Duck, for joining. Appreciate that. And yeah, next week I am talking about, and I have this here, because I did mention I've got Eraserhead coming up in a couple of weeks, but next week I am showing somebody Indiana Jones and the Last Crusade for the first time. They've never seen it. It's a gentleman by the name of Bill Meeks, and I can't wait to get Bill to watch
Has
this
he
movie.
seen has he seen other Indiana Jones movies?
He's seen Raiders of the Lost Ark.
Hey, that's gonna be tough because Last Crusade is not as good.
No, but I'm curious to see what he thinks of it, and I have a very special connection to it personally, that I like. I love both Raiders and Last Crusade. I see, why one is considered better than the others, but I love Last Crusade a lot. I think part of it is the Sean Connery connection too. There's something about him. But yeah, I can't wait for that. I've also, in a couple of weeks, I'm going to be talking about John Wick Chapter 3 because Chapter 4 is coming out. So makes sense to catch up on those. And like I said, Eraserhead, which I can't wait. Now that I'm on this David Lynch kick, I might start watching Twin Peaks and like start binging through that because I haven't watched the new one at all.
No, and it's weird because like Lynch made Inland Empire in 2005, and he was just doing other weird stuff for a while, and Twin Peaks: The Return was kind of his return to making. I mean, I don't know. I don't know if it's all one movie, but if it's like an 18-hour movie or a TV show or what, but it's his return to directing.
Yeah, because he for a long time he was just doing all these shorts, and he was doing like a weather report every day for whatever reason, just like a random. I'm just going to do the weather today. So he's
I
an
think part of it was
interesting dude.
he couldn't get funding.
Yeah. Oh,
But
I'm sure. But he is definitely one that marches to the beat of his own drum, and I love that. So, but definitely come on back for Indiana Jones next week and all sorts of more fun stuff. But Kevin, thank you so much for being here this week. This has been a ton of fun, and we'll definitely do it again sometime. You're welcome back anytime.
Thank you so much. Have a good night.
Yeah, until next week. Get out, enjoy your movies, and hey, be excellent to each other. This has been Wait You Haven't Seen.
Honey, you're a good kid, but what you're telling me is a load of horse pucky.
I loved Coco. Coco was great.
Yeah.